Let's go ahead and get the show on the road.
Yep, time to go.
I have a little housekeeping to get out of the way first, but welcome to No Wires, No Problem, the second installment of the Chicago Lightworks Roundtable Discussion Series. My name is Jim Westerfield. I'll be your MC today. Let me introduce today's participants, if you will. Michael von Bodman, LLC, is a division manager with Titan Electric with 24 years of experience in electrical construction of commercial, medical, industrial, municipal, and federal projects. Michael Brinkman is a senior associate and electrical engineer with CannonDesign, where he focuses on solving client challenges in healthcare, mission critical, and science and technology facilities. Ryan Wurtz, integrator lead for Archetype services, has traveled extensively, commissioning thousands of lighting control systems around the world. And Brian Coddington has been a control specialist in the Chicago market for over 25 years, having represented just about every major lighting control manufacturer. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to all of the attendees that are in listen-only mode. Please use the question feature in the taskbar to ask questions, which we will address towards the end of the panel discussion. Please keep in mind that our panelists' answers are their own professional opinions and should not be considered fact or the views of their respective companies. This session will be recorded and available to you upon request. Brian, please give us a brief overview of the discussion topic and our intent.
Thanks, Jim. Usually, lighting control systems involve an input device, such as a switch or sensor, working with a load controller like a relay or dimming power pack. To interact, the input device sends a signal to the load controller using dedicated low voltage wires. But a more recent approach, rapidly gaining in popularity, is for these devices to communicate using radio waves, thereby eliminating the need for dedicated control wires. However, many electrical engineers seem to feel more comfortable with a piece of copper carrying the signals instead of depending on radio waves. Are these systems reliable? Another point of consideration is that many times lighting control systems are connected to other systems, such as the building automation system, or even the internet for cloud control or data interaction. IT professionals get nervous about connecting any outside system to their otherwise secure local area network. How safe are these systems? Are they vulnerable? Of lesser debate is the potential cost savings. I think we can all agree that with the elimination of both the wires and the associated labor and conduit, especially in Chicago's plenum ceilings, there are potentially considerable savings. But is there an equipment premium? Where and what are the actual savings? Well, let's see what the panelists think about dependability, security, and the installed cost savings of today's wireless lighting control systems.
Thank you, Brian. You've given us a detailed overview and direction while also managing to provide me with several questions, which I'll now redirect towards the panel. Brian, you mentioned that an engineer's comfort zone seems to be with a piece of copper, intimating to me their faith in wired systems and asking, are these systems reliable? Well, what about that, Ryan? Have you witnessed gremlins running about and causing glitches in wireless systems that you've started up?
I would say in general, no, we don't see those types of issues. But what we really work towards is, as a commissioning and startup person, is working with the contractor on the placement of devices, making sure that we have good signal between all of the devices and things like that. I would say in general, while wireless lighting technology was in its infancy, we both in the field and manufacturers learned an awful lot. But as of today, the end user experience is exactly the same as wired. When they push a button, the lights do as they expect them to.
So those gremlins might move a device or two once in a while to try to fool you. And what about you, Michael? Have those gremlins caused any horror shows to rear their ugly head on you on projects that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I would say vetting out those gremlins, it starts with the implementation. The comfort of copper is really driven by being installed correctly. Well, once the system is started up, you vet out all the termination issues, everything's communicating, then you have that sense of accomplishment and everything's working fine. Wireless, the benefit of wireless kind of eliminates a lot of that troubleshooting because the devices are communicating once they're connected, communicating, and you don't have to seek out the missed terminations or the cross terminations. You immediately see the devices talking to one another. That really helps the troubleshooting and inherently the programming as well. So yeah, I would say it's definitely an improvement to the process.
So it sounds like to me that the way to avoid these gremlins is by proper placement to begin with, and then proper installation and terminations. Michael Brinkman, have you heard any scary things in projects, or had anybody raise a red flag on a project that you've been involved in, that you've designed, that says, wait a minute, this is not coming together right?
No, that's not the case for the few wireless projects that I've transitioned to in the last few years. In fact, when we were originally debating wireless for the first project I was involved with, we had a lot of apprehension about the new technology, understandably. The owner liked the idea of the wireless technology and being able to be more flexible in their spaces because they turn their spaces around a lot. So we definitely had to consider wireless against a wired system. We weren't allowed to just forget about it. But we really put it into the test to make sure that it would be robust enough. And how we did that was we took the manufacturer recommendation that they needed signal strength. With their signal strength, they could reach 60 feet. And so we actually ran a test through a wall in the facility it's affectionately called like the seawall. It's like a 3-foot thick concrete wall that's part of the foundation. Because this was an art school, they had some separate kiln spaces and more like robust fire protected spaces on the backside of this wall. And the system actually did achieve 60 feet with reliable signal strength. So that was kind of the big test that said, okay, we can actually use this system and we can trust that we're not going to lose communication as a part of the install.
And I want to reinforce the design and following the design. Placement is quintessential. You can't have cowboys in the field putting things in place willy-nilly, because the map, the layout is very important for the range to be within parameters and the devices to be able to communicate properly. And what Michael Brinkman mentioned about testing scenarios, everything looks good on paper, but you really need to identify your situations in the field to really vet out the potential problem areas. Maybe you have to add a couple more hubs or what have you to be able to make sure that range, the connectivity is there. So placement is key, following the design is key, and really communicating up the chain to the design team if there are any issues is very important to have a successful implementation.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely. And I would add to that, one of the things that we do and my group does is we'll do pre-wires for every job, but especially on wireless jobs as folks are getting up to speed on that layout. And we'll meet after submittals and kind of go over all of the placement in the field in a real world situation, right? Because that's the point where we can kind of start to iron out where the paper assumed one thing, but the facts of life are slightly different. And it's those kind of steps that you can take to really make a successful installation.
Well, I really enjoyed that. That was the first time I ever heard about a lighting controls mock-up, Michael.
Yeah.
What a great idea. And it sounds like it paid off very well for you. But it almost sounds like you've kind of each experienced it in to some degree then, vetting out some of the components of the system prior to moving forward with some of the design and installation. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, one of the key things is those border routers or those hubs, the placement of that, like Michael von Bodman was alluding to, and really understanding what the building you're working in, what the construction is of the kind of barriers that could affect that signal. Because if you're going into a new stick-built building, you may not need as many border routers, but if you're going into a large renovation project in some of our older building stock here in Chicago, I mean, you could be encountering CMU walls all over the place because one building used to be a mail sorting facility, or they used to print magazines, and now you're trying to put a tech hub in there, but you still have to address some of those historical legacies and be able to function despite them.
Yeah, our toughest challenge was a bank vault. We had a project that they wanted to put a lounge in the old bank vault, and the bank vault was wall-to-wall I-beams filled with concrete. And we did end up putting a wireless brain box, have you, in that vault, and wiring that back to the server on that job, because the signals just would not penetrate through that concrete steel reinforced wall. So I think Ryan is right on the money, making sure that the electricians actually place these. I had an early job that the contractors actually put the power packs up inside the I-beams, and the radio waves could barely escape. And this was like our first wireless job, and we learned a lot on that one. But we ended up adding a few power packs to repeat the signal, and the problem went away. Of course, we tell contractors not to do that anymore. And I think, as Michael said, you probably learned that on their own.
Well, actually, Brian, you've anticipated. I wanted to flip-flop this question. You led me right to it, and thank you very much. But so for, looking at it from another point of view, and the fact that the system is wireless, and Ryan, let me get you to start this one out again here. But the fact that that you're working with a system that's wireless, has it ever served as a life vest for you when troubleshooting or solving a problem that comes up on field?
Oh, definitely. I think that, wireless lighting controls in general are kind of inherently networked. So we generally have a much larger lighting system than when we're doing just like standalone open office, standalone private office. So the speed at which we can commission fully connected systems is much greater, and it also allows for a greater amount of troubleshooting in the field, as well as serviceability, right? So from one connection point, we can see kind of that entire control system when we're networked completely together and through. And then The other point is the point that Michael Brinkman brought up, which was we had you can have a situation where the furniture layout either changes or is different, and now it's no big deal to add an additional occupancy sensor, right? Because it's the physical placement of that, and then we just program it in. And the same way that we can kind of rezone things, we're no longer constrained to the physical attachment of these devices to each other, and that's a huge asset.
Oh, that's great. What about you, Michael? Have you ever been saved by one of your designs simply because maybe the placement wasn't enough for the infrastructure, and so therefore you were able to solve a problem without a lot of extra added work?
So I would say not so much on the placement like Brian was talking to, but more on the turnover to the client side. So I know prior to kind of moving more towards wireless systems, the last complicated wire job that I did for a very high-end commercial space, you get these very tight schedules, and right at the end is when the lighting controls get commissioned. And the furniture is being installed at the same time. And so what happened is that you had an owner occupancy prior to the final firmware getting flashed on to the processor for the lighting control. So there were all sorts of bugs, and we had this very particular office manager who would just not stop calling about the lighting control system, just because, and it wasn't just that there was a bug to fix, it was the method of fixing the bug, because in a wired system, you have to do any wiring changes, you have to take the lights down. So they couldn't work during that either. So that was a little bit of a thorn in our sides on that job. But on the wireless jobs that I have done, we don't get those callbacks because it works out of the box. You might not have the full exact functionality of specific scenes. Like if you have a training room and you want to do like 5 different scenes for like presentation, video conference, etc. But the lights are on, and if you need to change anything on the programming side, the lights stay on, and you can kind of do any of those changes behind the scenes without affecting the users.
Mike, can we dig one positive story from you too as well concerning this?
I would say being able to implement additional devices, troubleshoot systems while occupied has proven to be a blessing. The workarounds with wired systems is very cumbersome. You want to be considerate of the occupied spaces, a little bit less so these days, but because no one's in the offices, or tenant spaces are not as occupied. But I would say that the flexibility the wireless systems offer, and the quick implementation of changes is really a very large benefit to us as the installers, the implementers. So I would say specific scenarios, I have too many to give you. There are quite a few. I'm actually still working through one right now, but because of the flexibility of wireless, I can literally walk in the space with my phone app on the phone and make these changes on the fly, and really not disrupt anybody in the occupied space in general.
Sweet. Well, that's really great. It is certainly, it seems that we've addressed a very positive aspect to it, and that kind of recapping it, that the systems are much more easily serviced and easier troubleshooting simply because they are wireless. And from the sound of it, really the gremlins aren't there anymore. Whatever were there early on in wireless applications seems to be worked around. But Ryan mentioned something, and he said the fact about wireless being inherently networked brings me to my second top portion of the topics here. And IT professionals, as Brian mentioned, do get nervous about connecting any outside system to your local area network. And when thinking this through, I had wondered how often our systems, our lighting control systems actually integrated with the LAN or with the BAS. Mike, in the field, what kind of percentage of the jobs that you're working on are integrated to the BAS, and to what degree might that integration be?
I think that has scaled back considerably, just simply because the network integrated system is a little bit more costly. We're seeing a lot more code compliant systems with wireless devices and design layouts. But there are networked solutions, and I would say it's maybe a 10% probably hit rate with respect to overall network systems these days.
Michael Brinkman, does that kind of equate to a similar amount of design applicability?
So I would say that, the BAS and the LAN are kind of two different questions. And I think on both of them, I know in my designs, I've kind of come full circle, if you will. Like in the very beginning, as far as BAS integration, you had a lighting control system, whether it was a relay panel, and the BAS was completely separate, whether it was pneumatic or DDS. Then at some point we decided that, well, these should talk together. We can, they can both speak the same language, BACnet over IP or Lightworks or whatever, or we can put a bridge in. So let's make them share everything. And so I've designed systems where it was all built around, BACnet over IP, and you're connecting to all the bases. And so from one dashboard, the facility manager could look at both the HVAC and the lighting control. And then what you realize is that, number one, all those points cost a lot of money. Number two, the facility manager doesn't care. He doesn't look at the lighting control interface. He touches it maybe 10% of the time. And number three, you really don't change a lot through the facility manager interface, because if there's any changes, they're user-driven changes. And so at that point, you're calling either the electrician back, or you're getting replacement buttons or something to that effect. So from a BAS integration standpoint, like I said, we went nothing to everything, and now I'm back to either doing nothing again or just getting a time clock signal from the BAS, so that when the building manager sets holidays or yearly schedules, or you have a pandemic and nobody's occupying the building, they can, from one spot, whether it's their web interface at home or their PC down in the basement, they can set that schedule, and that'll work for the BAS and the lighting control. And one could argue that you could even do that as a direct contact interface, not even as an IP or an Ethernet interface. And that might save you a lot of headaches trying to integrate those two. Because the other portion that I questioned about the LAN, about the local area network, same thing again, full circle. In the beginning, I was designing completely separate physical networks of copper. When you do like a 43-story building, you're doing dedicated switches, copper, fiber backbone just for the lighting control, physically separate from their process network. And you had one point of connection where you had a PC with two network cards. And that's how you did it. Now, you get to the point where they're like, oh, we can use the same infrastructure, the same Ethernet infrastructure for everything, IP-based cameras, security systems, lighting control, BAS. But what happens is it becomes a bottleneck from an operational standpoint because, as Brian said, the IT manager doesn't like foreign systems on their network. So again, coming full circle to now I'm again doing separate physical networks and just having an antenna or some other connection out of the facility that just completely bypasses the IT manager's process network. Now there's a wireless system, that physical network is a lot smaller, but it's still, again, completely separate from the IT network just because it avoids all those headaches of getting MAC addresses. And then you have to have like 5 meetings with the IT professional, and you're just you're basically on your knees begging to get connected to their network or to be able to get remote access. And unless you have an advocate at the C-suite level to say this needs to happen, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I've encountered similar problems or issues in the field. We typically design systems with our own network. Occasionally someone wants us to jump on the building network, and that opens up that whole can of worms. I love the contact closure comment because that quite often is the simplest, easiest way to go. And that's usually the main thing that building managers want, is that time clock function. That's really all they want. They want to set one time clock for both lighting and HVAC and be done.
Well, that's great to know that there it seems to be roundabouts, but each of you, it sounds like, has a little bit of experience in this. What have you learned in working with the end user and the IT professionals about their concerns for wireless? Are these roundabouts, so to speak? Is this usually plenty? Is that all that you need to worry about as far as security goes? What's the to-do that I often hear about security concerns?
I'll jump in on that because
Thanks, Mike.
at my point of contact with implementation, I'm hoping that's all been figured out and there are no concerns. Because IT, as Michael Brinkman implied, IT is very paranoid about security breaches and the assignment of IP addresses and how they need to manage that with the integration implementation of these lighting control systems is a concern. So I would say that it's one of those things where I really hope I don't have to get involved, maybe just coordinate a little bit, like identify a meeting time for these guys to really hash it out. So I'm going to basically leave you with that, saying I want it to be handed to me in a set program form so that I can just implement it.
I feel like I need to comment about this a little bit because some of the newer, more advanced systems offer data gathering and data collection. And some of the C-level folks out there have glommed onto this for space utilization and space usage. And so that the IT integration on some of these more advanced systems seems to be a thing. And we do need to plan those more in advance so that it's not a problem by the time it reaches you, Michael von Bodman. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can say it's the start of a long day when we show up to start up a system, and that's the first time that anybody's heard or understood that we need IP addresses. You know, so to have those conversations early, to engage the manufacturers of these systems and the experts in these systems, so that the IT professionals can get comfortable with the security that's either on them or available to secure those, so that ultimately all those functionalities and all the benefits of a connected lighting system can be leveraged.
Well, super, thanks. Appreciate that a lot. I would like to move this one on. We're running a little bit close, and to get Ryan's last point, about the costs. And Brian, you mentioned something about the one less debatable point is the economics of the situation. Well, Mike, I want to go back to you again, because it does seem like the electrical contractor trade is driving wireless as much as the manufacturers are. So what kind of percentage of controls projects that you're quoting, that you're bidding on, have wireless controls specification to begin with?
I think the specifiers are doing a good job of keeping it open so that the wireless solution can be suggested if it isn't already listed. Percentage-wise, I'm drifting north of 70%.
Wow.
Wireless solutions for the large part. The wireless solutions to meet code are really great for standalone code compliant solutions to implement. From a contractor's perspective, the labor savings is there. You're spending a little bit more money on the equipment, but ultimately when you're not running the pipe, wires, the terminations, and really placing devices and the little bit it takes to program them, it's definitely economical. But I will say that I would say I hope to see that the wireless devices cost would come down a little bit because of supply and demand, pure economics, because the cost of wireless is actually a little bit more premium, like I mentioned, but I think overall, with respect to maintenance and long-term usage, it's definitely a winning solution.
So it sounds to me like you're seeing much more specified wireless these days. When you don't see specified wireless, how often are you actually posing another solution?
Every time.
I'm pointing the finger at you specifically, but once again, the contractor trade seems to be driving it and offering it up as a way to save money. And
well, we're always asked, where can we save money? And that's an easy one to hit, and quite frankly. And it does benefit on a long-term maintenance perspective as well, because it's easy to swap out devices. Battery powered versus hardwired, it's easier to maintain as well.
Michael, are your specifications going up as far as the number of wireless and specified versus wired compared to a year ago?
So compared to a year ago, I would say that no, there hasn't been much change because we were doing wireless a year ago. I would say, 5 years ago, we were all wired, and my opinion was that didn't like wireless, didn't want to deal with batteries, didn't want to deal with Picos, didn't want to deal with those sorts of items. But I think if you just close your eyes, stick your head in the sand, then like Michael von Bodman said, it's going to get proposed anyway. And once it's in front of the owner, it's very hard to change their minds at that point. So it would be better, or at least not as short-sighted, to at least plan for wireless, because then you have a seat at the table and your opinion matters, and they have to conform to the specification for wireless. If you just don't say anything, then whoever is submitting the job is certainly going to go lowest cost, They may not understand the construction of the building, and you may end up with more of those gremlins, if you will, because there would have been a disconnect between what the functionality that was desired and, you know, the contractor who's bidding, who has an imperfect view of that on the tail end.
Right. Always better to plan than to get surprised, right?
And the other thing I kind of glom on that Michael von Bodman said was about maintenance, because this, and almost as he's saying it, is a little bit of an epiphany, because I think one of the main reasons that engineers and specifiers are apprehensive about wireless systems is talking about the full life cycle of the system. I mean, when you do, you know, relay panels, or, you know, to what Brian was saying, just trusting 2 pairs of copper, you know, that's a piece of infrastructure that can last 50 years, the life of the building. But when you're talking about these wireless systems and processors and chip on board, you're talking about life cycles that sometimes are as short as 5 years. So there's, you know, a apprehension on the engineer's part of dealing with that sort of ongoing maintenance, or at least operational part of that system, that there's a battery that needs to be replaced every 10 years. Because as an engineer, we kind of want to make it so that the facility owner, you know, when we walk away, whatever's in there is going to last for the life of the building. But it's a completely different, you know, mindset of understanding that these more technology-based systems, the evolution of them is so fast that you kind of need to pick your moment of, this is the time for adoption of this sort of system, and understanding the limitations, like, you know, if it's a commercial build out that their lease is 10 years, the battery's gonna last 10 years, that's okay. Or if it's a more institutional client, having those sort of discussions about how to maintain the system through the life cycle of the building. And, you know, to Michael von Bodman's point, understanding that even though the component costs more, you're not going to Home Depot to replace it. You know, it's a you know, $15 item or $30 item instead of a $7 item, but the labor involved with replacing a wireless component versus a wire component can offset that.
Well, I'm hearing then that it's a done deal. There's a cost savings in labor, that materials may be slightly more. What about commissioning and startup, Ryan? Is that apples to apples, or?
Well, to Michael Bodman's point is that the number of hours, I would say, that we have lost over the years chasing down a bad Cat5 termination or a bad RJ45 connector, and you end up dragging the ladder all over this Cat5 run. You know, you don't have that with wireless, and so from that standpoint, the troubleshooting is oftentimes very much simplified. But the actual process of commissioning and starting up a system is somewhat similar. The benefits are obviously to having a network system on those larger installations, and being able to see all of those devices and to make those changes, and to kind of just commission at a much higher level than kind of just standalone wired rooms.
Ryan, I think we talked about this maybe in our rehearsal, but about how in order to get your electrician card, you need to know how to terminate Cat5. But you'd be surprised how many electricians botch it, even on the first install. Is that something you run into a lot still?
It is, and sometimes it's actual hardware. We've had an install recently where it was a batch of bad RJ45 connectors where ultimately the pins weren't touching in there. So it was no person's fault, but the nickel thing, the nickel device ended up costing hours trying to chase down what's what. And so it takes time when you're moving through ceilings to identify those things. So it does happen.
I'll tell you what, now that we kind of got through that, my head's going around and around, because it seems like the possible cost savings come from a lot of directions when it comes to wireless. And I honestly didn't even think about half of those. Just replacement components later on, save labor and just changing out components that go bad. The labor savings to start out with, and the reduced amount of hours just to track down issues at commissioning or during failure times. It all just kind of boggles my mind. It's been a great conversation. I'd like to keep it going on our side. Let's see if we can keep it going a little bit from the viewpoint of our viewers. And I have a few questions here. And let's see here. My question.
I've been dabbling in the background, Jim, answering some questions.
All right.
So.
All right. My questions got.
Yeah, they're still here, Jim. So the first question we got was, are there any customer preferences on wireless controls with battery power versus constant hardwired power? Now, I know some manufacturers make like wall switches that wire into power versus a wall switch that has maybe 2 AA batteries or something. Have any of you guys seen any preference from your end users on those kinds of switches?
I would say Michael Brinkman would be the starting point of that conversation.
Yeah, I would say that from the customer side, they either don't have a preference, or the other advantages to the system kind of overrule any apprehension they would have on batteries. Going back to that sort of art school, that was my first real on a system-wide level of wireless sort of installation. It was an institutional client. They'd been there for many years. They were obviously planning to stay for many years. So beyond the 10-year life of a battery, they were aware of those limitations, because I was pushing hard to make sure they understood what the limitations were, because I was not a fan of wireless. But to them, the ease of being able to turn over spaces, because they do turn over spaces multiple times a year, is they were just going to keep adding stock, and as they pull devices in and out, be able to change what are basically they're not watch batteries. They're those fat. They look like a AA, but they're like half as long. So that was kind of their kind of value judgment on that. But for like Michael von Bodman answered the question, a lot of especially corporate commercial tenants, the leases, especially because of the pandemic, are getting shorter and shorter. So that space is getting turned over either as part of a refresh or a new tenant within what used to be a 10-year standard is now more like 5 or 7. So the battery just doesn't come up as an issue.
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple comments on this, because when we first started doing wireless lighting controls, the batteries were proprietary. You had to go to an electronics store to get them. But most of the manufacturers now have gone to more readily available batteries. They're literally either AA's, AAA's, or there's something you can go down to Walgreens and buy. So they're a lot easier to get than they used to be. Plus, most controls manufacturers have put some kind of notification either on the device or in their software, where they actually send you an email that the battery is going bad and that you're going to need to replace it. So I think some of those early complaints, the manufacturers have really reacted and come up with some solutions. So.
And the warranty is more robust, because now you have a 5-year warranty on a product.
Yep.
That's a standalone product. Whereas when you're doing a wired installation, you just have the 1-year warranty from the contractor on the wired portion. So you really have to judge, where did, the maintenance shifted, the warranties shifted. When you transition from a wired system to a wireless system, basically the guardrails, if you will, that keep you safe, not having those callbacks, they changed, but they're still there, and in some ways.
Great.
Okay, there's a couple more questions here. Are we seeing wireless controls specified for residential high-rise dwelling units as well?
Yeah, I keyed in. I don't see much wireless in those applications, but that's not to say it's not coming, because just the pace.
I've seen maybe a little bit in the corridors and in amenity spaces, but not really in the actual personal dwellings. So
I have it personally at home because I really like the wireless solution.
Yeah, I do too. Okay.
I don't know that just my opinion on that one, though, is that it's a really great idea and something that we probably should see more of, because controls in high-rise residential the design community never seems to get what they want, because it's all value engineered out even if it's designed in. So this is maybe a way to save money on the system and kind of maybe get a little bit better system as a result of it. So anyway, I'm sorry.
No, that's good. It's all good. One other question, have you found wireless controls solutions that allow successful global controls of whole floors and whole buildings?
I think access is probably the word that allows access globally.
Maybe. But I would answer the question, yes. We have deployed a few projects where maybe not the entire building, but 3, 4, 5 floors. Anyone else?
I would say for whole floors, yeah, definitely on the corporate commercial side, wireless. And then again, that same institutional client, the wireless sensors and controls were part of whole floors of that. They weren't renovating the whole building, but they planned to expand. So we put in infrastructure, basically the hubs, if you will, to allow for expansion to the whole floor. And then they were also using that as a part of a multi-campus solution. So it's more than just one building. You can do multiple buildings with a wireless solution.
Right, and I'll piggyback on that. It is really program driven. It's got to come from the top, and if that is part of the program, then you'll see some of these solutions be a part of that. Somewhat networked on the overall architecture of the campus, if you will, and then it'll trickle down to wireless local solutions. So
and I think that also plays into what we talked about earlier about not sticking your head in the sand. Is wireless systems are coming, so it's going to be proposed on your project, but you need to make sure that you already have designed or picked the right systems that can accomplish the functionality, because not all wireless systems can do multiple buildings or can do some of the more advanced functional requirements.
They're out there, you just got to look for them.
Yeah, there definitely are, but if you don't say anything, like, you know, cost is the main driver, and so some of that functionality could be lost.
Great.
The other thing we run into too is hybrid systems, where part of the system is wired and part of the system is wireless, all interacting together. So, and sometimes that provides, you know, the best solution depending on what your client demands are.
Best of both worlds.
Absolutely. And Brian, to that point, we've done situations where we have wired in corridors and amenity spaces, and the building owner has fitted out a spec suite now that's wireless, and we can tie both of them back together and make one big system out of that whole thing. So it allows a lot of functionality.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it a lot. I always have one question here to close with, and we just have a couple minutes left. So how about a quick 30-second answer on this one? Looking into your crystal ball, what do you see as the future in wireless lighting controls? Let's start out with Ryan.
Wireless lighting controls, I think in fixture control will no doubt be a large part of it, where we will see power into a fixture and a wireless combination sensor, 0 to 10 dimmer or dolly, and kind of start building systems from the fixture level, opposed to having external room controllers or power packs in there. I think that there'll always be some augmentation in occupancy sensing and obviously switching and things like that, but that's where I see it.
Mr. Brinkman?
I think there's like 3, if you will, levels of systems that'll emerge. Number 1, you'll have your lowest cost, code compliant system that'll be wireless and will be fixture integrated. So that spec will primarily be driven by whoever the luminaire manufacturer is. That'll be, you know, a package spec. You'll have a layer above that that'll be a more advanced system where you have a lighting designer or whomever who's picking a variety of fixtures, you know, with phase dimming and ELV and all of that, where you can't do integrated sensors. So that'll be a higher level system, a more advanced system. And then the third tier will be driven by either an institutional client or a developer who's looking for a smart building. And so they're leveraging the wireless interconnected environment to create an app for a user interface that'll be linked to wayfinding and security and all that sort of thing. And I would argue that future is now. That's not in the long term. That's now going forward. So that's what's going to be emerging or has emerged in the near future.
Thanks, Michael. Mr. von Bodman?
I would say that Ryan and Michael have really touched on, you know, what we get to look forward to. The one thing I think technology will improve upon are ranges of wireless, and being able to kind of expand on the current layouts that we're looking at. I think the other gentleman hit all the points pretty solidly. We're just basically going to see technological improvements. There are so many variations of applications that it's hard to fit one solution into a box. It's a matter of which one fits the solution best. But you'll see improvements nonetheless.
Absolutely. Brian, last but not least, your 30-second take on the future.
Well, I think all you guys have really encapsulated. Michael Brinkman, you really you kind of nailed it. I think we are here. We are here and now with the 3 solutions that you mentioned. We are in the infancy with that whole data collection and smart building. That is where wireless was 5 years ago. And I think that's a lot of where the future is going to go. The rest of the future of wireless is to really wring these systems out so that they can do 100% of what you would expect from a wireless or from a wired lighting control solution today. And there are a few gaps now. Some systems just can't quite get to, dual technology is one of those things. So there's little gaps, and I think those gaps are going to get filled in. But I think the smart building is the next big thing. So,
yeah, corporate commercial real estate was circling the drain before. It's in the toilet now. So there are a lot of developers with vacant buildings out there, and they see this as the only way to get a leg up on the enormous amount of competition that is now fighting for what is left of the corporate commercial world that's willing to occupy, grade A office real estate. So they need to reinvent themselves. And this, along with kind of like smart energy or renewable energy, that's what they're looking for as differentiators.
yeah.
Appreciate that. I think you guys have given me some ideas on the next roundtable. We did get one comment during that crystal ball session, and it went towards Ryan's comment. And Sean Murphy wants to know when.
Happening now in small scale. There are options available, obviously in sensor or in fixture types of things, and I think that's going to just keep expanding out over the next few years.
Super. I can't disagree with that one. I think that is and the design system for luminaire manufacturers, that you use systems to rate your ideas that you want to work on and scale them and prioritize them. And all of those points that you 4 just made, they're all on everybody's list, but they're all prioritized different. But Ryan's, I think, is probably up towards the top of that prioritization, especially with the major manufacturers.
Yep.
We're going to see that moving forward fast. So, well, once again, thank you all so very much. Really, really appreciate. What a great conversation. Good topic. I learned a lot. I want to thank you very much. And thank you oh so very much to all the participants out there and your questions. Very good, excellent questions. Lindsay, Sean, thanks so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys next month for the next edition of the Chicago Lightworks panel discussion.